The mysteries of the ancients and the associations in which their doctrines were taught have hardly been considered in modern times, but with a view to decry and ridicule them. The systems of ancient mythology have been treated as monstrous absurdities, debasing the human reason, conducting to idolatry, and favoring depravity of manners. However, they deserve attention. If the motives of their inventors, rather than the profligacy and ignorance of their corruptors, be contemplated. When men were deprived of the light of revelation, those who formed systems of morality to guide their fellow creatures according to the dictates of improved reason deserved the thanks of mankind, however deficient those systems might be. Or time may have altered them. Respect, not derision, ought to attend the efforts of those good men, though their labors might have proved unavailing. In this point of view must be considered an association traced to the most remote antiquity, and preserved through numberless vicissitudes, yet retaining the original marks of its foundation, scope, and tenets. It appears that, at a very early period, some contemplative men were desirous of deducting from the observation of nature moral rules for the conduct of mankind. Astronomy was the science selected for this purpose. Architecture was afterwards called in aid of this system, and its followers formed a society or sect, which will be the object of this inquiry. The continuity of this system will be found sometimes broken, a natural effect of conflicting theories, of the alteration of manners, and of change of circumstances, but it will make its appearance at different periods, and the same truth will be seen constantly. The importance of calculating with precision the seasons of the year to regulate agricultural pursuits, navigation, and other necessary avocations in life must have made the science of astronomy an object of great care in the government of all civilized nations. And the prediction of eclipses and other phenomena must have obtained for the learned in this science such respect and veneration from the ignorant multitude as to render it extremely useful to legislators in framing laws for regulating the moral conduct of their people. The laws of nature and the moral rules deducted from them were explained in allegorical histories, which we call fables, and those allegorical histories were impressed in the memory by symbolical ceremonies, denominated mysteries, and which, though afterwards misunderstood and misapplied, contain systems of the most profound, the most sublime, and the most useful theory of philosophy. Amongst those mysteries are peculiarly remarkable the Eleusinian, Dionysus, Bacchus, Osiris, Adonis, Thamus, Apollo, etc., were names adopted in various languages and in several countries to designate the divinity who was the object of those ceremonies, and it is generally admitted that the sun was meant by these several denominations. Let us begin with a fact, not disputed, that in these ceremonies a death and resurrection was represented, and that the interval between death and resurrection was sometimes 3 days, sometimes 15 days. Now, by the concurrent testimony of all ancient authors, the deities called Osiris, Adonis, Bacchus, etc., were names given to, or types representing the sun, considered in different situations and contemplated under various points of view. Therefore, these symbolic representations which described the sun as dead, that is to say, hidden for 3 days under the horizon, must have originated in a climate where the sun, when in the lower hemisphere, is, at a certain season of the year, concealed for 3 days from the view of the inhabitants. Such climate is, in fact, to be found as far north as latitude 66, and it is reasonable to conclude that, from a people living near the polar circle, The worship of the sun with such ceremonies must have originated, and some have supposed that this people were the Atlantids. The worship of the sun is generally traced to Mitraic rites and those invented by the Magi of Persia. But if the sun could be made an object of veneration, if the preservation of fire could be thought deserving of religious ceremonies, it is more natural that it should be with a people living in a frozen clime, to whom the sun is the greatest comfort, whose absence under the horizon for 3 days is a deplorable event, and whose appearance above the horizon a real source of joy. Not so in Persia, where the sun is never hidden for 3 days, together under the horizon, and where its piercing rays are so far from being a source of pleasure that to be screened from them to enjoy cool shades is one of those comforts, to obtain which all the ingenuity of art is exerted. The worship, therefore, of the sun and the keeping sacred fires must have been a foreign introduction into Persia. The conjecture is strengthened by some important facts which, referring to astronomical allusions, place the scene out of Persia, though the theory is found there. In the Bun Dehesh, we find translated by Anquetil du Perron, we find that the longest day of the summer is equal to the 2 shortest of the winter, and that the longest night in the winter is equal to the 2 shortest nights in summer. This circumstance can only take place at the latitude of 49 degrees 20 minutes, where the longest day of the year is of 16 hours 10 minutes, and the shortest of 8 hours 5 minutes. This latitude is far beyond the limits of Persia, where history places Zoroaster, to whom the sacred doctrines of the Persian book Bun Dehesh are attributed. This proportion, then, of days and nights, as a general rule, could only be true in Scythia, whether at the sources of the Irtish, the Obi, the Genichi, or the Slinger. We know nothing of the ancient history of those Scythians, or Massagets, but we know that they disputed their antiquity with the Egyptians. And that the above principle, though attributed to the Persian Zoroaster, is only applicable to the country of those Scythians. But let the origin of the mysteries of the sun begin where it may. They were celebrated in Greece, in various places, amongst other at Apollonia, a city dedicated to Apollo and situated in latitude 41 degrees 22 minutes. In this latitude, the longest day has 15 hours, differing 3 hours from the length of the day when the sun is on the equinoctial. The reverse is the case with the nights. This circumstance will account for the preservation of 3 days in these mysteries, even when celebrated in Greece, and also for the 15 days, or representation of the number of 15 in some of the Eleusinian rites. The mysterious numbers were employed to designate such and similar operations of nature, for it is said that the Pythagorean symbols and secrets were borrowed from the Orphic or Eleusinian rites, and that they consisted in the study of the sciences and useful arts, united with theology and ethics, and were communicated in ciphers and symbols. Similar intimations as to the mystic import of numbers are found in many other authors. Plutarch says that to offer an odd number to the celestial gods and an even one to the terrestrial is proper, the sense of which precept is hidden from the vulgar. The same Plutarch, in Vitae Lycurgi, explaining the number of the Spartan senators who were 28, says, "Something perhaps there is in being a perfect number formed of 7 multiplied by 4, and with all the first number after 6 that is equal to all its parts." Another proof of the mystic import of numbers is found in Plutarch. The perfection of the number 3 consists in being the first of odd numbers, the first of plurals, and containing in itself the first differences and the first elements of all numbers. The fertility caused by the inundations of the Nile over the adjacent country caused this river to be considered as a mystic representation of the sun, parent of all fecundity on earth, of the earth, and therefore a name was given to it containing the numbers 365, or days in the solar year. The Greeks thus preserved the name Greek N 50, Greek E 5, Greek I 10, Greek L 30, Greek O 70, Greek S 200, 365. The letters representing numbers formed Kabbalistic names, expressive of the essential qualities of those things they meant to represent, and even the Greeks, when they translated foreign names whose Kabbalistic import they knew, so they rendered them by Greek letters, and to preserve the same interpretation in numbers, which we find exemplified in the name Nile. Dionysus Siculus. The fertility caused by the inundations of the Nile over the adjacent country caused this river to be considered as a mystic representation of the sun, parent of all fecundity of the earth, and therefore a name was given to it containing the number 365, or days in the solar year. The Greek thus preserved the name Nelos, Greek N 50, Greek E 5, Greek I 10, Greek L 30, Greek O 7, Greek S 200, 365. But in the number 3, to which so many mystical and moral allusions were made, had a reference to the 3 celestial circles, 2 of which the sun touches, passing over the 3rd in its annual course. The mysteries of Eleusis. The mysteries of Eleusis, the same as those of Dionysus or Bacchus, were supposed by some to have been introduced into Greece by Orpheus. Dionysus Siculus says that the Athenians invented the Eleusinian mysteries, but in the first book of his library he says they were brought from Egypt by Erectus. Theodoret Affect says that it was Orpheus who invented those mysteries, imitating, however, the Egyptian festivities of Isis. Arnobius and Lactantius describe those mysteries, as also does Clemens. They may have come there from Egypt, but Egypt may have received them at a previous period from the Persians, and these again from the Scythians, but taking them only as we find them in Greece, we will give here an outline of their ceremonies. The aspirant for these mysteries was not admitted a candidate till he had arrived at a certain age, and particular persons were appointed to examine and prepare him for the rites of initiation. They were exhorted to direct their passions, to merit promotion by improving their minds. Those whose conduct was found irregular or who had been guilty of atrocious crimes were rejected. Those found worthy of admittance were then instructed by significant symbols in the principles of the society. At the ceremony of admission into these mysteries, the candidate was first shown into a dark room called the mystical chapel. There, certain questions were put to him. When introduced, the holy book was brought forward from between two pillars or stones. He was rewarded by the vision. A multitude of extraordinary lights were presented to him, some of which are worthy of particular remark. He stood on a sheepskin. The person opposite was called the revealer of sacred things. And he was also clothed in a sheepskin or with a veil of purple, and on his right shoulder a mule skin spotted or variegated representing the rays of the sun and stars. Myrobius Saturnalia. I will copy here an English translation of this passage, which I have read somewhere. He who desires in pomp a sacred dress, the sun's resplendent body to express, should first a veil assume of purple bright, like fair white beams combined with fiery light. On his right shoulder next a mule's broad hide, widely diversified with spotted pride, should hang an image of the pole divine, and doidal stars whose orbs eternal shine, a golden splendid sown. Then o'er his vest he next should throw and bind it round his breast, in mighty token how, with golden light, the rising sun from earth's last bounds and night, sudden emerges and with matchless force darts through old ocean billows in his course, a boundless splendor hence enshrined in dew, plays on his whirlpools, glorious to the view, while his circumfluent waters spread abroad, full in the pleasance of the radiant God. But oceans circle like a zone of light. The sun's wide bosom girds and charms the wandering sight. At a certain distance stood the torch-bearer, who represented the sun, and beside the altar was a third person who represented the moon. Thus we perceive that over those assemblies presided three persons in different employments, and we may remark that in the government of the caravans in the eastern countries, three persons also direct them, though there are 5 principal officers, beside the 3 mathematicians. Those 3 persons are the commander-in-chief, who rules all, the captain of the march, who has the ruling power and as long as the caravan moves, and the captain of the rest, or refreshment, who assumes the government as soon as the caravan stops to refresh. Some authors have observed the same division of power in the march of the Israelites through the wilderness, and consider Moses as the captain general, Joshua the captain of the march, and perhaps Aaron as the captain of the rest. The society of which we are speaking was ruled by 3 persons with different duties assigned to them by a custom of the most remote antiquity. The mysteries, however, were not communicated at once, but by gradations. The perfective part precedes initiation, and initiation precedes inspection. In 3 different parts. The business of the initiation, properly speaking, was divided into 5 sections, as we find in a passage of Theo, who compares philosophy to those mystic rites. Again, philosophy may be called the initiation into the sacred ceremonies and the tradition of genuine mysteries, for there are 5 parts of initiation. The first is previous purgation, for neither are the mysteries communicated to all who are willing to receive them, but there are certain characters who are prevented by the voice of the crier, such as those who possess impure hands and an inarticulate voice, since it is necessary that such as are not expelled from the mysteries should first be refined by certain purgations, but after purgation the tradition of the sacred rites succeeds. The third part is denominated inspection, and the fourth, which is the end, fixing of the crowns, so that the initiated may by these means be enabled to communicate to others the sacred rites, in which he has been instructed, whether after this he becomes the torchbearer or an interpreter of the mysteries, or sustain some other part of the sacerdotal office. But the fifth, which is produced from all these, is friendship with divinity, and the enjoyment of that felicity which arises from intimate converse with the gods. Theo of Smyrna in Mathemat. These ceremonies thus far appear to contain the lesser mysteries, or the first and second stages of the candidate in his progress through the course of his initiations. There was, however, a third stage when the candidate himself was made symbolically to approach death and then return to life. I approached the confines of death, and treading on the threshold of Proserpine, and being carried through all the elements, I came back again to my pristine situation. In the depths of midnight, I saw the sun, glittering with a splendid light, together with the infernal and supernatural gods, and approaching nearer to those divinities, I paid the tribute of devout adoration. Apuleios, metamorph. In this third stage of the ceremony, the candidate was stretched upon the couch to represent his death. As to the festivities in which those mysteries were celebrated, we find that on the 17th of the month, Athir, this month, Athir, according to the Julian year, answers to November, or the winter solstice. But with the Jews, the month of Tammuz, when the solemnities of Adonis were celebrated in Judea, was in June, or summer solstice. The reason appears to be that the Jews, taking this month from the vague year of the Egyptians and not from the fixed year, settled Tammuz in the summer solstice. As to the festivities in which those mysteries were celebrated, we find that on the 17th of the month, Athir, the images of Osiris were enclosed in a coffin or ark. On the 18th was the search, and on the 19th was the finding. Thug, in fables or symbolical histories relating to these mysteries, we find Adonis slain and resuscitated, the Syrian women weeping for Tammuz. Let us now examine what was meant by this symbolical death and resurrection, or by certain personages said to have visited the Hades and returning up again. We must here observe that the fables were intended to convey more than one meaning, in proof of which we copy the following passage. Of fables, some are theological, others animastical, or relating to the soul, others material, and lastly, others mixed of all these. Fables are theological, which employ nothing corporeal, but speculate the very essence of the gods, such as the fable which asserts that Saturn devoured his children, for it insinuates nothing more than the nature of an intellectual god, since every intellect returns to itself. But we speculate fables physically when we speak concerning the energies of the gods about the world, as when considering Saturn the same as time, and calling the parts of the time the children of the universe. We assert that the children are devoured by their parent, but we employ fables in an animastic mode when we contemplate the energies of the soul, because the intellection of our souls, though by a discursive energy they run into other things, yet abiding their parents. Lastly, fables are material, such as the Egyptians ignorantly employ, considering and calling corporeal nature divinity, such as Isis, earth, Osiris, humidity, typhon, heat, or again denominating Saturn, water, Adonis, fruits, and Bacchus, wine, and indeed to assert that these are dedicated to the gods in the same manner as herbs, stones, and animals is the part of wise men, but to call them gods is alone the province of fools and madmen, unless we speak in the same manner as when, from established custom, we call the orb of the sun, as its rays, the sun itself. But we may perceive the mixed kind of fables as well, in many other particulars, as when they relate that discord at the banquet of the gods through a golden apple, and that a dispute about it arising amongst the goddesses, they were sent by Jupiter to take the judgment of Paris, who, charmed with the beauty of Venus, gave her the apple in preference to the rest. For in this fable, the banquet denotes the supramundane powers of the gods, and on this account a subsisting conjunction with each other. But the golden apple denotes the world, which on account of its composition from contrary natures is not improperly said to be thrown by discord or strife, but again, since different gifts are imparted to the world by different gods, they appear to contest with each other for the apple. And the soul living according to sense, for this is Paris, and not perceiving other powers in the universe, asserts that the apple is alone the beauty of Venus. Of these species of fables, such as are theological belong to philosophers, the physical and animastical to poets, but they were mixed with initiatory rites, and the intention of all mystic ceremonies is to conjoin us with the world and the gods. Sallust, the Platonic philosopher. It appears that this type, in all its various forms and denominations, indicated the sun passing to the lower hemisphere and coming again to the upper. The Egyptians, who observed this worship of the sun under the name of Osiris, represented the sun in the figure of an old man, just before the winter solstice, and typified him by Serapis, having the constellation of Leo opposite to him, the serpent or hydra under him, the wolf on the east of the lion, and the dog on the west. This is the state of the southern hemisphere at midnight about that period of the year. The same Egyptians represented the sun by the boy Harpocrates at the vernal equinox, and then was the festivity of the death, burial, and resurrection of Osiris, that is to say, the sun in the lower hemisphere, just coming up and rising above in the upper hemisphere. In this upper situation, the sun was called Horus, Mithras, etc., and hailed as Sol Invictus. We will now point out some other symbols to express the same phenomena, though different from these types we are treating of at present. In the Mithrical astronomical monuments, where the figure of a man is represented conquering and killing a bull, there are two figures by their sides with torches, one pointing downwards, the other upwards. These monuments, where the mysteries in question were depicted, the man killing and conquering the bull represent the sun passing to the upper hemisphere through the sign of Taurus, which in that remote period, 4,600 years before our era, was the equinoctial sign. The two torch bearers, the one pointing his torch downwards, the other upwards, represent the sun passing down to the lower hemisphere and coming up again. At the remote time before alluded to, the sun entered the sign Taurus at the summer equinox, and the year was begun at this period among the Egyptian astronomers.